This is the video notes on the urban environment, chapter 13, which is all about creating sustainable cities. So the case study in this is talking about Portland, Oregon, and it is mentioning about how Oregon is trying to deal with its urban sprawl and to become a more sustainable city with alternative transportation routes, so more bike routes, walkable. So this is what a lot of cities are trying to do today. All right, some vocabulary that you need to know. Make sure that you know the difference between urban, rural, and suburban. Urban is a city of more than 2,500 people. Rural is a city or area that's less than 2,500 people. And suburban is an urban area on the outskirts of a city. So for the most part, everywhere where New Jersey is basically a suburban or of New York City, almost the entire state, unless you go out near Princeton, which is a major city, or Trenton, but for the most part, where we're all located, we are the suburban area. Now, when people move from a rural to an urban area, this actually means a decline in birth rates. For the most part, people are moving into urban areas for jobs, because of either better education, so there's more universities usually in an urban location, and that's going to be your younger population for the most part that moves to the urban areas from rural areas. Now, the UN estimates that almost all population growth will be urban, and for the most part, the USA, we have more urban than rural populations right now. And with new politics, there is no need for many children anymore. There isn't as much farmland. There's not a lot of arable land left. So if there are farmers in the family, they for the most part can only give the farm or have enough land for one child. So all the other children are then moving into the big city because there is no job opportunities at home in the rural community. So this is the reason why so many more younger generations are moving towards cities, and we're doing the shift from rural to urban. Okay. So reasons people move to the cities. The poll: jobs, healthcare, and education. All right, so a lot of the major high-paying jobs are located in cities, hence New York City. And healthcare. For the most part, most hospitals in the cities are actually more advanced. They have more grants. They're tied to higher education universities. So a lot of the times, and this is the same for New York City, that the higher education is better. Okay. Push. People have moved there because of wars, because of famine, so there isn't, and environmental degradation, all right? So these are all impacts that have forced people to move to cities. Now, big thing about the education, this is mostly higher education, your colleges and universities, not necessarily your grade school education. Ironically, most people, when we'll talk about it, move out of cities because of the lower grade education is not as good as maybe in the suburban areas. Now, the U.S., for the most part, the North and the East, which is where we're located, has been predominantly the cream of the crop. However, for the most part, the USA, we're moving south and west, and that's because people don't want to deal with the cold climate anymore that the North and the East Coast has. So people are flocking to Florida, California, the Carolinas, anywhere where it's warmer areas, okay? All right. So the reasons why people move to suburbs and add to sprawl. It's because now we have the availability of cars and roads. Before this happened, people couldn't get out of the cities, but now that we have all these highways and cars are readily available, people can move to the suburbs. Affluence, basically, if you could move to the suburbs, that meant you had money because you could buy a huge house, you could own land, whereas previously people just rented apartments. Or you owned a small little 700 square foot apartment. It wasn't like you owned a mansion. And ironically, cheaper homes in the suburbs. It's actually cheaper, and this is true still today, to live in the suburbs than in a city. So yes, New Jersey is one of the most expensive states to live in. However, a home in Bergen County, you get a lot more for your money than if you were, for say, buy the same size of home or spend the same amount of money in a city area like Hoboken. So for $800,000, you only can get a 2-bedroom apartment, whereas for $800,000 in the suburbs, you can get a 4-bedroom house with a backyard, a fenced-in area, garages, driveway, etc. So yes, it could be more expensive, and this is where people move for money, but it's more that you got grander things for your money. Now, why people move out of the cities to the suburbs in the first place? Desire for a yard, to have their own private green space. Traditionally, your grade schools are better, so your high schools, your elementary schools. There's less crime, less pollution, and a lot of this all started after World War II. The roads were built in the 1930s during the Great Depression. Cars were readily available by this point. So again, it was the rich that were able to purchase these cars, obviously, because we were during the Great Depression. But this is what started all this move to the suburbs. Okay. All right. Make sure you know the 5 negative impacts of sprawl. This includes transportation. Again, with the increase of transportation, that means the increase of pollution. It also encouraged congestion and are now much more increased dependence on oil. Historically, when this all happened, there wasn't a lot of mass transit options. So everyone had to drive from suburbia back to the cities for work. So just keep that in mind. Okay, pollution, as we mentioned before, increase the carbon dioxide emissions, which we'll be talking about with climate change in chapter 18. And you have your smog now, your acid rain. We've got runoff from all the pollutants from parking lots and highways, from spilled oil, your road salt that we have to use, especially in the northeast area for the winter time. So we've added all these new options to create more pollution than we naturally already have. Okay, health. In addition to pollution, sprawl promotes physical inactivity. So people are sitting in their cars for longer periods of time to transport themselves to and from the city. People aren't walking as much. So there's higher risk of cardiovascular diseases, high blood pressure. People are becoming more obese. This is the fast food chain started because you don't have as much free time or time to cook your own dinners when you get home. So you have to depend on pre-made food. So those all are related. Okay, land use. Now, because of this urban sprawl, we have less forests and open fields, and that's because they've been replaced with homes, sprawling estates. So, big thing, as I said here, forests to urban development. It has caused a decrease in evaporation, transpiration, and groundwater recharge, and that's because of all the new asphalt and concrete grounds that we have. It's also caused an increase in runoff. Okay, urban runoff specifically, which we kind of talked a little bit about with transportation. Okay, Atlanta is a perfect example of this. Is that Atlanta is sprawling like crazy right now, and basically all of its natural vegetation and forests are pretty much gone. All right, and this is a big negative because, again, remember, your forest and your open green space, that actually is an aesthetic beauty. It adds to recreation as well, water purification. So we're actually destroying a lot of these amenities. The last one is economics. So again, the urban sprawl actually increases money through taxes to maintain all of our infrastructure and new development for the communities. And so less money is being spent on maintaining cities and more on roads and ways for people to get to said cities. So just keep those all in mind here and read through that. All right. So next page, we're talking about zoning and urban planning. Make sure you know what city or urban planning is, regional planning, and then zoning itself. Now, the word municipal we use is having to do with anything to do with the city. So depending on where you live in the suburbs, we still even use the phrase like municipal water or municipal sewer. This means it's just city maintained, all right? Now this diagram here is showing you all different zoning examples. So you can have high density, medium, or low density residential zoning. You have industrial zoning, commercial zoning, and then mixed use zoning. So just make sure you realize that there's all different types of zoning, and all cities and major towns have this, where you're supposed to have a little bit of everything with your zoning, okay? All right. The next thing you have to make sure that you know on page 339 is 2 to 3 smart growth principles. I just realized I spelled that wrong. Okay. So make sure you review this list here. And these are all the goals of smart growth. Now, one of those is new urbanism, which you need to make sure you know examples of it. And ideally, that is when you live and work in the same area, so you have a very walkable or bikeable community. As we talked about in the case study, Portland, Oregon is a perfect example of that, where they have a lot of bike parking centers near major transit centers for people to get to and from different places within the city. So make sure you review this list. Okay. All right, so graphs on the next page you should review, and it just talks about all the different types of energy consumptions for modes of transportation. So as you can see, which ones use up the most. And then also your greenhouse emissions, which one releases the most. And this is again per passenger, so just keep that in mind. And then last but not least, the costs. So just make sure you look through these charts. All right. Parkland, okay? So it's important for us to have parks in all major urban environments. They help purify air, they help get people out in nature, which is biophilia, which is a vocab word that they talk about in this chapter, and also for scenic beauty. New York City, Central Park was a planned park. It was a planned green space. It's one of America's first city parks, and it's one of the largest and finest that we still have today. So those who did the planning of New York City did a great job in creating Central Park in the center of Manhattan. All right, some other vocabs, words to know is greenway, green belt, green building, and LEED building. Perfect example of the greenway is the High Line that's in Manhattan, which we're all familiar with. It's basically what they did is they created this park and recreation area out of old railroad tracks that used to actually bring all the meat to the meatpacking district area. And it's beautiful. It's got all vegetation that is local to the New York area that may or may not be there anymore, but they brought it all back. There's sun decks, they do concerts. It's a great place for New York City residents and visitors to just enjoy nature and be outside. Now, your LEED buildings, this is how eco-friendly buildings can be. They have a ranking system. If you look on the page, it's leadership in energy and environmental design. You can be granted silver, gold, or platinum status, and it all has to do with what type of materials you use in your building, where your materials come from, and also a lot of those sustainable activities. So make sure you review and know 3 or 4 features of green buildings. It could be anywhere from low VOC painting and flooring that you use. It could be that you have a rain garden. You use all energy efficient appliances and light fixtures. All their lumber is from protected forests. Use solar panels or natural lighting, so skylights. Other things is you make sure you're insulated, both your building and your windows, to prevent loss of heat and also loss of your air conditioning in the summer. A lot of them have eco roofs or green roofs. So like here, this is actually becoming popular in the cities. It helps with climate control. Okay, we're gonna stop here and have another video in a second.